Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. We often talk about creating authentic experiences in historical interpretation and storytelling, but we rarely define in detail what we actually mean when we talk about authenticity or when we talk about creating a historical experience. Often I find that it can be helpful to define authenticity in terms of historical accuracy or historical facts, and that can actually help us a little bit to describe what we mean when we talk about authenticity in terms of interpretation and historical storytelling. Now, if we look to the right first, accuracy denotes action and events, activities that's based on available evidence. And what actually is available evidence? Well, that can be historical facts and research, but it can also be historical sources, written sources, as well as it can be archaeological remains. Those are things, sources that we have as a direct link back in time, back to a specific historical period. Now, an authentic historical experience is a representation, a perception, or an impression of accuracy, as well as it can be the belief that the representation or the impression captures parts of, for example, the past or of a story. So historical authenticity is not necessarily accurate, but it is an impression of accuracy. And often we see this in, for example, living history, in live interpretation. We can see it in historical role plays, as well as in interactives, digital or non-digital, historical games, in films and literature, and so on. Now, a few notes about historical authenticity. Historical authenticity is often based on historical events or periods or situations where the unknown gaps have been filled using our imagination, using subjective, entertaining, educational, personal, learning perspectives, and so on. So, for example, if we take a film that's based on a historical character or, for example, historical events, it may be based on certain historical facts that we know about and they can be well known, but a lot of the time the gaps have been filled with either entertaining or specific subjective perspectives that has been made up by, for example, a scriptwriter. Historical authenticity is often inspired by historical facts and accuracy, and we see this, for example, in literature and in films as well, but also very much in, for example, live interpretation or living history. Now, the complex relations between what is fiction and evidence, facts, entertainment, learning and culture and so on are very often what creates an authentic experience. And what do I actually mean by this? Well, when we take part in, for example, a historical role play, we know perfectly well that the experience we are creating together is not historical truth or facts, but because we base our experience or the game or the activity on historical facts and we take inspiration from accuracy and facts, we create an authentic experience together in which we can seek inspiration and we can seek further knowledge from. And that is what makes the experience real. All those things combined together: historical accuracy, truth, evidence, for example, archaeological remains, but also our own imagination, what we add to the experience, what we learn from the experience is very much what creates authenticity in this case as well. And that is indeed the entire definition of it. A few tips for creating immersive, authentic experience is, first of all, immerse audiences and visitors in an authentic world. So a world that feels accurate. Do not pretend it is accurate, but make it believable. And I think that word is probably the key phrase. And don't pretend it is truth or accurate, but make it believable. Acknowledge when facts or the truth are stranger than fiction, and this will happen. So make use of extraordinary historical events and the fascination that they spark. An example just on top of my head is, for example, the coronation of Napoleon. which is such an extraordinary event that he crowned himself. And I think it's very hard for any imagination to really top that. But there are some historical events like that where it feels almost like facts or the truth is indeed stranger than fiction. So make good use of that. Acknowledge stereotyping, or when wrong assumptions come up, even when you actually want to deny them, because inaccurate assumptions can be very hard to ignore. And they do come up from time to time. Sometimes visitors will bring them to you directly, and you know they are based on maybe well-known assumptions, but that doesn't make them any more accurate. An example is, for example, that it's often claimed that women didn't fight, and we know perfectly well that there are hundreds of examples of women leading armies into battles, for example, or indeed fighting alongside men, sometimes in disguise, but nonetheless we know women from time to time went to battle. But when you are faced with something like that, acknowledge that the assumption is there and that it exists. Don't try and ignore it, but you can of course try and correct it if the opportunity is right for it. Also, be careful when using words or titles or phrases that didn't exist at the time you are trying to depict or represent. So, for example, addressing people in the appropriate way or adhere to certain social traditions, customs, norms, and so on. If it wasn't fashionable to shake hands when you met someone, then don't do that. Maybe it was fashionable to courtesy or to bow or whatever was in at the time. Historical accuracy is a really fascinating concept, and it can be very hard to define. And often I find it's easier to define from activity to activity or situation to situation, depending on what you're doing, because creating an authentic experience goes hand in hand with what it is you're trying to do. What is your purpose of your historical activity or your exhibition or your live interpretation or whatever it is you're doing? What's the purpose of it? Where are you going with it? And what sort of experience is it actually that you're trying to create and you want to engage visitors or audiences in? And having those questions defined first of all will often help you in creating a real and an authentic and an immersive and believable experience. Let me know your thoughts on this, and if you have any experiences on a practical level as well as on a theoretical one. It's always really great to hear from you. And as always, if you like the content of these videos, please like, subscribe to the channel and add your comments.